When a child grows up without emotional protection, safety does not feel stable. Love may have been present, but it was unpredictable. Moods shifted without warning. Reactions felt disproportionate. Tension could rise suddenly, and the child learned that staying unaware was not an option, so they became aware of everything. They listened closely to footsteps in the hallway. They memorized tones of voice. They studied facial expressions before words were even spoken. They sensed when something was off, long before anyone admitted it. This wasn't curiosity, it was survival. When you are not emotionally protected, you protect yourself by anticipating. As that child grows into an adult, the pattern does not simply disappear. People call you intuitive, observant, deep. Emotionally intelligent, you can walk into a room and immediately feel the atmosphere. You can detect tension between two people before they speak. You notice subtle shifts in energy that others overlook completely. But what many don't see is the cost. Your nervous system rarely rests. You are constantly scanning. Even in calm moments, a part of you is alert, monitoring for change. You analyze text messages, you replay conversations, you notice when someone's response time is slightly different than usual. Your mind fills in the gaps quickly, trying to predict outcomes before they happen. Hyper-vigilance feels normal to you. In fact, slowing down can feel uncomfortable, because staying alert once kept you safe. It helped you avoid conflict. It helped you prepare emotionally before something escalated. It gave you a sense of control in environments where you had very little. But as an adult, this constant scanning can become exhausting. It can make relationships feel intense. It can create anxiety where there is no immediate threat. It can cause you to interpret neutral situations as potential danger. You may struggle to fully relax around others, even when they are trustworthy. The truth is, your hyper-awareness is not weakness. It is an adaptation. It developed because no one consistently protected your emotional world. So you became your own protector. You learned to read between the lines because clarity was not always given to you directly. Healing does not require you to lose this sensitivity. It requires teaching your nervous system that not every room is unsafe anymore, and that awareness can exist without constant alarm. When you were not emotionally protected as a child, love often felt conditional. It may not have been openly stated, but it was subtly understood. Connection required adjustment. If someone was overwhelmed, you learned to calm them. If someone was angry, you learned to soften yourself. If someone was distant, you tried harder. You discovered early that relationships felt safer when you managed other people's emotions. So you became the regulator. You soothed adults who should have soothed you. You sensed when tension was rising and stepped in emotionally before it exploded. You minimized your own needs because someone else's reactions felt bigger, louder, more urgent, and over time, your brain wired love and responsibility together. Love meant caretaking. As you grew older, this pattern followed you into friendships and romantic relationships. When someone you cared about was stressed, you felt personally responsible for easing it. If they were upset, you assumed you played a role. If they were struggling, you carried their burdens as if they were your own. You didn't just empathize, you over-identified. This is where empathy quietly becomes self-sacrifice. You begin to believe that if someone you love is unhappy, you have failed. You try to fix what is not yours to fix. You overextend to maintain harmony. And if the relationship starts to feel imbalanced, you work harder instead of stepping back. The tragedy is that this feels normal to you, because in childhood, emotional responsibility kept connection intact. It may have prevented rejection. It may have reduced conflict. It may have made you feel needed and valued. But as an adult, carrying that same role creates exhaustion. You may find yourself in relationships where you give more than you receive. You anticipate needs without being asked. You struggle to let others sit with their discomfort because their discomfort triggers your anxiety. You feel uneasy when you are not helping. But love was never meant to feel like constant management. Healthy love allows space for two separate emotional worlds. It does not require one person to regulate both. It does not demand that you shrink your needs to maintain peace. If you are not emotionally protected, you may have confused love with overfunctioning. Healing begins when you realize that caring does not mean carrying. You can support someone without saving them. You can empathize without absorbing. You can love deeply without becoming responsible for emotions that are not yours. And that shift changes everything. If you were not emotionally protected as a child, your needs may have felt like inconveniences. Maybe when you cried, you were told you were too sensitive. When you were angry, you were corrected instead of understood. When you wanted attention, you were reminded that others had bigger problems. Slowly, without anyone explicitly saying it, you absorbed the message your needs are secondary. So you adapted. You learned to minimize yourself. You became low maintenance. You told yourself you didn't need much. And when you did need something, reassurance, comfort, validation, you felt uneasy asking for it. It felt like you were demanding too much. That discomfort doesn't disappear in adulthood. In fact, it often intensifies. When you try to set a boundary, your chest tightens. When you say no, guilt rises almost immediately. When you choose rest over responsibility, a voice inside whispers that you are being selfish. Even when your request is reasonable, it feels excessive. Your nervous system associates self-prioritization with risk. As a child, expressing too many needs may have led to withdrawal, conflict, or emotional distance. So now, even in safe relationships, your body reacts as if asserting yourself could cost you connection. You may over-explain your boundaries. You soften your tone. You apologize for things that don't require apology, and afterward you replay it in your mind. Did I sound rude? Was I too much? Should I have just stayed quiet? Chronic guilt becomes your internal companion. Not because you are doing something wrong, but because you were conditioned to equate worth with self-denial. Being easy to love meant being undemanding. Being good meant being selfless. But there is a difference between selfishness and self-respect. Selfishness disregards others. Self-respect includes yourself. When you were not emotionally protected, you may have never learned that your needs carry equal weight, that your fatigue matters, that your discomfort deserves attention, that your boundaries are not attacks, they are clarity. The guilt you feel is not proof that you are wrong. It is proof that you are breaking an old pattern. And every time you honor your limits despite the discomfort, you teach your nervous system something new. Connection does not have to require self-abandonment. Over time, that guilt softens. And in its place, something steadier begins to grow. Quiet self-trust. When you were not emotionally protected as a child, conflict did not feel like a simple disagreement. It felt like danger. Raised voices, cold silence, sudden mood shifts. These were not minor events. They were destabilizing. You didn't experience conflict as something that could be resolved calmly. You experienced it as something that threatened connection, so you learned to avoid it at all costs. You became agreeable. You softened your opinions. You read the room carefully before speaking. If tension started to rise, you quickly adjusted your tone or backed down. Not because you didn't have thoughts or feelings, but because preserving emotional safety felt more important than expressing them. As an adult, that conditioning remains in your nervous system. Even healthy confrontation can make your heart race. When you need to address something that hurt you, you rehearse the conversation repeatedly in your mind. You imagine worst-case scenarios. You worry about being misunderstood, rejected, or abandoned. You may delay difficult conversations for days or weeks, hoping the feeling will fade on its own. Sometimes you convince yourself it's not worth bringing up. You tell yourself you're overreacting. You minimize your discomfort. You prioritize keeping the peace over speaking your truth. And if you do decide to confront something, you may over-explain to ensure the other person doesn't feel attacked. You cushion your words with disclaimers. You apologize before you even begin. Because deep down, conflict still feels like it could cost you love. Emotional rejection, even subtle, can feel disproportionately painful. A shift in someone's tone can trigger anxiety. A delayed response can feel like withdrawal. Your body reacts not just to the present moment, but to past experiences where connection felt fragile. But here is the truth: conflict is not the enemy, unresolved fear is. Healthy relationships are not free from disagreement, they are safe enough to handle it. They allow space for discomfort without threatening connection. They do not punish honesty, they do not withdraw affection when boundaries are expressed. If you are not emotionally protected, you may have equated harmony with safety. Healing invites you to redefine safety as authenticity. Your voice does not destroy connection. Silencing it does, and each time you choose to speak calmly but honestly, even when your heart races, you begin teaching yourself something powerful. Disagreement does not equal abandonment. It can be a bridge to deeper trust. When you were not emotionally protected as a child, you learned very early that relying on others could be risky. Maybe your feelings were dismissed. Maybe comfort came inconsistently. Maybe you reached for support and found no one steady enough to hold you. So you adapted in the only way you could. You became strong on your own. Independence wasn't a personality trait at first. It was protection. You stopped expecting too much. You handled your problems quietly. You processed emotions internally instead of expressing them outwardly. You told yourself that needing less meant hurting less. And over time, you became incredibly self-sufficient. People admire this about you now. They call you resilient, grounded, mature. You don't easily fall apart in front of others. You don't demand constant reassurance. You appear emotionally steady. But what many don't see is the layer beneath that strength, because independence can sometimes mask loneliness. When you learn not to rely on others, you also learn not to fully lean into connection. Even when someone offers help, a part of you hesitates. You may appreciate it, but you don't fully relax into it. You're used to carrying yourself. Letting someone else carry you, even briefly, can feel unfamiliar. You might even struggle to identify what support looks like for you. When someone asks, "What do you need?" your mind goes blank. You're so accustomed to meeting your own needs that receiving feels unnatural. And while you rarely complain, there may be moments when you wish, quietly, that someone would notice your exhaustion without being told. That someone would show up for you with the same attentiveness you offer others. But because you don't express that longing openly, it remains hidden. You tell yourself you're fine, you remind yourself you've handled everything before, and you continue being the strong one. The truth is, emotional independence is powerful. But humans are not meant to survive on strength alone. If you were not emotionally protected, you may have confused needing no one with being safe. Yet real safety includes interdependence, the ability to stand on your own while also allowing others to stand with you. Healing is not about losing your independence, it is about softening enough to let support reach you. Strength and vulnerability can coexist, and beneath your resilience there is still a human heart that deserves to be held, not because you earned it, but because you are worthy of it. When you were not emotionally protected as a child, your sensitivity did not disappear. It intensified. You became deeply attuned to pain, not just your own, but everyone else's. You could sense sadness behind a smile. You could feel tension in silence. You could recognize emotional shifts before they were spoken aloud. This became your superpower. You developed extraordinary empathy. People feel understood around you. They open up quickly. They trust you with their vulnerabilities because you listen without judgment. You don't just hear words, you feel the emotion underneath them. And that ability is rare. But without emotional protection growing up, no one may have taught you how to contain that empathy. So instead of witnessing pain, you absorb it. Instead of supporting, you carry. When someone you care about is struggling, your body reacts as if the struggle is your own. Their anxiety becomes your anxiety. Their sadness lingers in your chest long after the conversation ends. You replay their problems in your mind, searching for solutions. You feel responsible not just to comfort them, but to relieve them. And that's where boundaries become fragile. You may struggle to differentiate between compassion and over-involvement. You step in quickly. You overextend your time and energy. You give advice when what's needed is simply presence. You lose sleep thinking about how to fix what was never yours to fix. Over time, this emotional absorption becomes exhausting. You might feel drained after social interactions, even positive ones. You may withdraw not because you don't care, but because caring feels heavy. Your heart is open, but without clear boundaries, openness becomes overload. The truth is, empathy without structure leads to depletion. Healthy empathy allows space between you and the other person's experience. It says, "I see your pain and I care," without saying, "I will carry it for you." It understands that supporting someone does not require self-sacrifice. If you were not emotionally protected, you may have never seen that modeled. So now, part of your healing is learning containment, learning that you can feel deeply without drowning, that you can love without losing yourself, that your sensitivity is not a weakness, it is strength when paired with boundaries. You do not need to shut your heart down to protect it. You simply need to hold it with intention. And when empathy and boundaries finally work together, your sensitivity becomes sustainable, not something that drains you, but something that empowers you.